25 million people watched it happen. Live. The entire nation held its breath as comedian Trevor Noah went head-to-head with civil rights attorney Jasmine Crockett on national television. But what Jasmine revealed on air, secret contracts, damning emails, and a hidden video, was so explosive, Trevor walked off the stage without saying a word. Was it a setup, a political takedown, or did Jasmine just expose one of the biggest media manipulation scandals of the year? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The American Spotlight studio burned under harsh lights, tense like a battlefield before fire. Cameras loomed overhead like silent snipers, waiting for the first crack. The audience packed in, suits stiff, MAGA caps tilted, faces locked in focus. Not a word, not a laugh, just breath, shallow, synced, strained. Security lined the walls, statues in dark suits. Jack Harper entered from stage left, not walking but marching. A former war correspondent turned primetime anchor, Jack wasn't known for small talk. His voice was a gravel storm, every word deliberate and heavy. Tonight, he said, pausing like a judge before the verdict, is not about opinions, it's about exposure. This is no longer a conversation, it's a confrontation. His eyes scanned the studio like a general gauging the battlefield. The monitors behind him showed two faces, Trevor Noah on the left, Jasmine Crockett on the right. And in this war of words, Jack continued, only one truth will stand. Trevor Noah sat already in his chair, legs crossed, his smile lazy but eyes calculating. He wore a dark navy blazer, clean cut, television perfect. But if you looked closely, his fingers interlocked on the table betrayed something else. Tightness, control, maybe even fear. He had built his brand on being unshakable, witty under pressure, a mirror to political hypocrisy. But tonight was different. He wasn't surrounded by laugh tracks and liberal producers. Tonight he was in enemy territory, and he knew it. Then came Jasmine Crockett. No teleprompter, no entourage, just heels clicking on studio floor like gunfire. A Harvard-trained lawyer with the fire of street protest in her blood, she had taken on corporate giants, police departments, and corrupt officials, and won. Her hair pulled tight, her suit sharp, and her eyes sharper. She didn't look like she came to debate. She looked like she came to deliver a sentence. In her hand, a single black folder. No theatrics, just facts. Cold, heavy, and possibly fatal to careers. As she sat, the studio froze. A cough, a whisper, phones raised. The air was thick, like a storm about to hit. This wasn't a show. This was a strike, and someone was going down. The silence held for just a moment longer. Then Jasmine leaned forward, eyes locked on Trevor like a predator who'd studied every weakness. Her posture was controlled, almost relaxed, but every inch of her body radiated intent. The black folder sat untouched in front of her like a grenade waiting for its pin to be pulled. She didn't need theatrics. Her words would be enough. Her voice was even, cool, not loud, but it carried with the clarity of a courtroom verdict. Trevor Noah, she began, her gaze steady, is not just a comedian. He's not some neutral entertainer cracking jokes about life and politics from the sidelines. She paused, letting the weight of that land. No, he is a coordinated campaign, a production, a scripted performance masked as humor, but crafted to distort, divide, and discredit. The audience was frozen, barely blinking. What you've watched all these years wasn't improvisation. It was calculated messaging, disguised with charm and punchlines, she continued. Each joke wasn't just funny, it was targeted. Each laugh wasn't just spontaneous, it was rehearsed. It's a show dressed up as truth, designed to make one side look stupid and the other look like saviors. And Trevor? He's the lead actor in a play that pretends to be balanced while tipping the scales. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The certainty in her tone hit harder than shouting. This isn't about comedy, she said. It's about control. It's about weaponizing humor to undermine people who think differently, and doing it while pretending you're just keeping it real. Jasmine's hand rested lightly on the folder now. You built your brand on being clever, on being the outsider who sees through the noise. But what happens when the one pointing fingers is just as scripted as those he mocks? Then she leaned in just slightly, her voice dropping by a fraction. This is not a debate, Trevor. This is exposure. The words hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Then Trevor leaned back, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He chuckled, slow and deliberate. The kind of laugh meant more to stall than to express anything real. So let me get this straight, he said, tapping a finger on the edge of the table. You're accusing me of writing jokes the way a prosecutor builds a case? His tone was light, but behind the smirk, something flickered. Annoyance, maybe fear, maybe both. You really think my monologues are blueprints for brainwashing? The crowd shifted, unsure whether to laugh or stay silent. Look, I've been doing this for years, he continued, voice sharper now. I call out hypocrisy, I talk about the headlines, and yes, I use humor. That's what comedians do. I didn't know telling the truth with a punchline made me a criminal. He leaned forward just a little, locking eyes with Jasmine. Or maybe the real problem isn't the jokes. It's that they hit too close to home. Trevor's words lingered in the tense air, but before the room could exhale, Jasmine answered, sharp, steady, and straight to the heart. If you truly don't realize you've been funded to steer public opinion, she said, voice calm but unflinching, then this is far more serious than I thought. Her words didn't rise, didn't shake, but the cold clarity behind them hit harder than any shout. Trevor's expression held still for a moment, but something subtle shifted in his posture. His jaw tightened, eyes narrowed, and for the first time that night, he didn't have a comeback ready. Jasmine didn't break eye contact. She didn't blink. She didn't need to. Her silence between the sentences was just as loud as the statement itself. Around them, the crowd began to stir. First a quiet shuffle, then whispers spreading like a current across the room. Someone in the back let out a skeptical scoff. Then louder, "Where's the proof?" Another voice joined in, this time urgent, demanding, "Show us what you've got." The tension in the room twisted, rising like pressure under a sealed lid. Phones tilted higher, camera lenses narrowing in, mouths half open, ready to react. Trevor sat back slightly, trying to hold his ground, but his fingers tapped against the table. Faster than before, just enough to notice. Jasmine stayed still. The chaos didn't touch her. She didn't rush. She didn't smile. She let the crowd grow restless because she knew what was coming, and so did Trevor. With the precision of someone who had done this before, not on a stage but in courtrooms, depositions, and closed-door hearings, Jasmine slowly reached into her leather satchel and pulled out a black folder. No flash, no sudden movement. It wasn't meant to be theatrical. It was deliberate, focused, the kind of calm that made people nervous because it only showed up when someone had nothing left to prove. She laid the folder flat on the center of the table between them. A simple black leather case, no logos, no markings, just clean, worn at the corners from use. When it touched the table, the sound was soft, barely audible. But somehow it echoed. It echoed because the room had fallen completely, unnaturally silent. Every camera lens zoomed in. Every audience member leaned forward, just slightly, unconsciously, as if drawn by gravity. Trevor didn't say a word. His fingers, which had been tapping just moments ago, now locked together tightly in his lap. His eyes followed her movements like a chess player watching the next move. Too late to stop it, too proud to retreat. Jasmine unzipped the folder. Her expression never changed. Her breath steady, unshaken. She didn't glance at the audience. She didn't even glance at Trevor. Her eyes were on the papers, one by one, like a surgeon lifting instruments. The first document came out slowly. Jasmine held it up with two fingers and placed it neatly on the table, angled toward the camera. It was a copy of a wire transfer, not a vague receipt, a detailed, verified document. The logo of a well-known San Francisco-based nonprofit appeared in the top left corner. The recipient, a media content production company with direct ties to The Daily Show's satellite team. The amount, $2.7 million. The note, for strategic comedic engagement, targeted political messaging, Phase 2, anti-MAGA. She didn't need to say anything, but she did. Calm, measured, Clear. $2.7 million, transferred in one payment, not overtime, not spread across departments, one lump sum. Her voice cut through the tension with a scalpel's edge. And if anyone in this room still believes this is just comedy, then maybe they need to read the line marked intended use. Murmurs rose from the audience like steam from boiling water, whispers turning into audible disbelief. A few gasps. One person shouted, "That's not satire, that's a hit job." But Jasmine didn't acknowledge them. Her attention was on the next page. She pulled it from a separate sleeve, unfolded it neatly, and placed it beside the first. An email. Real, unredacted, printed in black ink with a timestamp and sender details. The sender? A senior producer within Trevor's own team. The subject line? Weekly viewer metrics. But the message body was far more telling. Jasmine read it aloud, not with anger, but with the clarity of someone reciting a sworn statement. Need to double down on MAGA ridicule. Engagement is up 24%. Audience responds strongest when Trevor leans in hard. Push sharper writing. Avoid nuance. A few people in the crowd laughed nervously, as if unsure what side they were on anymore. Others didn't laugh at all. One woman put her hand to her mouth. One man lowered his phone. The realization was beginning to settle in, not just that Trevor may have crossed a line, but that it was all laid out in front of them, in ink. Trevor shifted in his chair. Barely, just enough for the camera to catch the movement. He reached for his water but didn't take a sip. He was listening now, really listening. Jasmine moved on to the final page. This time she didn't lift it. She slid it from the folder, placed it dead center on the table, and let the weight of it linger. It was a contract, a production agreement bearing Trevor's name, his signature, the seal of the studio, and a red underline across a very specific clause. Performance bonuses tied to digital reach, minimum 10 million views. Priority content, U.S. conservative political figures and ideologies. Emphasis on satirical contrast and ridicule. She didn't need to add commentary, but she did, softly and with precision. A bonus, not for creativity, not for impact, not even for reach alone. A bonus for targeting a political group, for tearing down an ideology, wrapped in the clothing of comedy. She looked at him for the first time since opening the folder. Tell me, Trevor, do the laughs still feel honest when you know what they're worth? The air in the room didn't just thicken, it locked, like doors had quietly shut and windows sealed without warning. Trevor held his posture, but his expression betrayed something else now. Not just resistance, not just denial, but awareness. The kind that only comes when you realize the ground beneath you isn't as solid as it once felt. Jasmine rested both hands on the edge of the table. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. Comedy is a tool, she said, eyes locked with his. A powerful one. It can open minds, cut through lies. But in the wrong hands, it stops being truth dressed in laughter. It becomes something else, a weapon. She let the silence stretch for just one breath longer. And tonight, I'm showing them who's holding it. The silence held for just a heartbeat longer. Then, like pressure finally bursting through a sealed pipe, Trevor rose from his seat, and the calm was shattered. He stood tall, shoulders squared, but his jaw was clenched tight and his lips pressed into a thin, hard line. His hands, steady a moment ago, now trembled faintly as he pointed toward the folder spread across the table. I've spent my career using comedy to call out what's absurd, he said, his voice sharp, clipped, barely containing the storm behind it. I've used laughter to question power, not to serve it, and I've never taken money to lie to anyone. He turned toward the nearest camera, eyes burning with defiance. What are these? He demanded, gesturing sharply at the documents. Who verified them? Who vetted them? They could have come from anywhere. For all we know, they're props, stage pieces in her show. The audience jolted at the accusation. Gasps broke out, quickly followed by loud voices colliding in midair. One side erupted, chanting, Trevor! Trevor! Like a rallying cry from a battleground. He doesn't bow! One man shouted from the third row, fist raised, eyes wild with conviction. Another shouted back across the aisle. "No backing down! Speak your truth!" Trevor remained standing, his body angled toward Jasmine now, eyes flashing with both anger and exhaustion. "You want to smear me with paper and buzzwords?" he snapped. "Try facts, not theatrics." But the other side of the room wasn't silent. They rose like a counterwave, voices rising to match the chaos. "Show the video!" a woman yelled, her voice cracking with urgency. "Drop it now, Jasmine!" Another man followed, practically leaning out of his seat, his phone held high. "Prove it!" Their voices were raw, passionate, split between hunger for justice and the thrill of the moment. This was no longer just an interview. This was a war zone made of words, perception, and politics. The air in the studio thickened, not just with sound, but with heat, tension, and the weight of something about to break. Trevor's eyes flicked back toward the camera. He took a step forward, slow and deliberate, planting himself in front of the lens like a man standing trial before the court of public opinion. "I don't play for side," he said, quieter now but sharper, "and I don't twist truth for applause. Everything I've said on record. I've never needed backroom deals or secret donors to know what I believe." His voice cracked, just barely, and he caught it, steadied it. What's happening here? This isn't about truth. It's about spectacle. And some of you are already buying it." Jasmine said nothing. She didn't need to. She watched him, cool, unreadable, as if observing a storm she'd already forecasted. The lights overhead seemed to bear down harder now, shadows carving deeper lines into Trevor's face. Sweat glistened at his temple, but he didn't wipe it away. Maybe he didn't notice. Maybe he didn't care. The audience was no longer a crowd. It was a split jury, each side convinced the other had been lied to. Phones kept rolling. Comments were being typed in real time. "Trevor's getting railroaded," one live stream caption read. Another blazed, "She's got him cornered." It wasn't just a debate. It was a media trial with no judge, no rules, only emotion. Trevor turned again to Jasmine, voice low, fists clenched. "If you have something real," he said, "then bring it. But don't act like a few headlines and typed up PDFs are enough to define who I am. You want to bury me with a folder? Then read every line, aloud. Now let the world see if it holds up to the light." He paused, breathing heavy, chest rising and falling, as if each word had cost him more than he expected. "But if you're just here to perform, to win followers and retweets, then congratulations. You've already got your moment." The crowd roared again, divided and deafening. The studio had become a crucible, voices bouncing off the walls, echoing through the tension like the rattle of sabers before a duel. Every face was turned forward, some angry, some afraid, all captivated. Some saw Trevor as the victim of a political ambush. Others saw a man unraveling under pressure, cracking beneath the weight of his own contradictions. He remained standing, unmoving, a statue built from resistance and pride, surrounded by noise he couldn't control. The lights didn't soften, the cameras didn't blink, and somewhere in the blur of chance and accusations, the line between truth and theater had all but vanished. The shouting in the room still lingered like smoke after a blast. But Jasmine didn't raise her voice to meet it. Instead, she smiled, calm and cold, like someone who already knew the final move on the board. She didn't rush. Her composure was unnerving, quiet, calculated, and entirely in control. As the noise dipped just enough to hear a pin drop, Jasmine leaned in slightly, her eyes locked on Trevor with surgical precision. That smile, not wide, not warm, but sharp as a scalpel, stretched across her face as if to say, "You walked into this trap yourself." Her voice dropped, smooth and deliberate. "If Trevor is really as innocent as he claims," she said, "then maybe he can explain something simple." She let the words hang there, let the weight settle before cutting through it. "Why did you refuse every single invitation to speak, on record, live, with conservative platforms after you left The Daily Show?" The question didn't come as an accusation. It came like a challenge issued from higher ground. No rage, no theatrics. Just a slow, undeniable tightening of the noose. Trevor's expression didn't change at first, but the shift was there. a subtle tightening around the eyes, a second too long before answering. He straightened up, as if to summon the weight of his past credentials to brace himself. "Because I don't debate with people who don't want to listen," he shot back, tone firm, voice louder now, edged with frustration. "I've spent years watching those platforms twist facts, interrupt guests, and turn everything into a circus. I'm not stepping into a trap where the goal isn't dialogue, it's demolition." He looked around the room as he spoke, trying to draw sympathy from the crowd, but the response wasn't what he expected. Some nodded, others didn't. A few arms crossed. The silence that followed wasn't in his favor. It was laced with doubt. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She let his words hang just long enough to feel like an excuse, then calmly slid her voice between the silence like a blade between ribs. "No," she said simply, her tone firmer now, every word placed like stone. "It's not because they won't listen." She leaned forward just a touch, voice low but unmistakable. "It's because they had evidence, and you knew it." The audience stirred, more alert now, as if waking to something they hadn't fully considered before. "You didn't walk away to protect your principles. You walked away to avoid the spotlight when it wasn't scripted." She moved with the same precision that had defined every moment since the broadcast began. No rush, no flourish, just cold, deliberate control. From the inside pocket of her blazer, Jasmine pulled out a small, silver USB drive and held it between her fingers like a scalpel. The studio lights caught the edge of the metal, casting a brief flicker across the table, as if signaling the sharpness of what was about to come. Her voice, low and unwavering, cut through the tension like a wire snapping under pressure. "This," she said, "is a recording from an internal editorial meeting at The Daily Show." She didn't raise it for the camera, didn't wave it for effect. She simply placed it on the table in front of her, beside the documents. "In this footage," she continued, "Trevor says, word for word, if we want to keep our ratings up, we target Trump." A murmur rolled through the audience, not loud but unmistakably charged, like the distant tremble before a landslide. Jack Harper, still seated between them like a referee in a heavyweight bout, leaned forward slightly. His voice, deep and slow, carried the weight of the moment. "Trevor," he said, eyes narrowing, "are you willing to watch this video, right now, in front of the country?" It wasn't a challenge. It wasn't even a dare. It was an invitation to face something he may not have expected to surface. The question floated in the air, unanswered, as all attention turned to Trevor. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked at Jasmine, long and hard, not blinking. There was no humor left in his expression now. The charm, the wit, the polished performer who once ruled late night, he was gone. What remained was a man cornered, processing a threat he didn't fully control. Slowly, he shifted his gaze to the camera directly in front of him. The red light above the lens glowed steadily, watching him the way the country now was, without judgment, but with complete focus. And still, he said nothing. The silence expanded. Not the kind that falls from confusion or awkwardness, but the kind born from pure tension, when even breath feels like noise. Jack didn't repeat the question. Jasmine didn't move. The studio was still, as though the entire production had frozen in time. Only Trevor remained in motion, just barely. His eyes flicked once, back to the USB, then to the crowd, then again to Jasmine. His jaw clenched, his shoulders stiffened, but his lips didn't move. Not a word, not a nod, not even a refusal. Just silence. Absolute, telling silence. The audience leaned in, some instinctively, some without realizing. Phones stayed up, cameras still rolling, each frame capturing the unraveling of a man known for never missing a beat. Somewhere in that stretch of breathless seconds, the question stopped being about whether Trevor would watch the video and became something deeper. If he had nothing to hide, why hesitate? And if he did, how much longer could he hold the silence before it turned into surrender? The tension in the studio was now electric, almost unbearable. The kind of moment that doesn't need commentary because it's already louder than any headline. Trevor Noah, once in control, now sat in a stillness that screamed. Not answering was an answer, and the room knew it. The silence had roared louder than any scream, and still Trevor said nothing. But in that stillness, something shifted. An internal line crossed, a decision made. What followed wasn't defeat, it was exit. Trevor reached for the microphone slowly, his movements heavy, deliberate, like a man carrying weight that no one else could see. The cheers, the doubt, the pressure, it all seemed to collapse inward as he wrapped his fingers around the mic, then pulled it gently from its stand. No defiance, no outburst. Just a subtle resignation etched into every line of his face. He looked up, not at Jasmine, not at Jack Harper, not even at the audience, but directly into the camera lens. It was the kind of stare that cuts past the lights and the noise, straight into the homes of millions watching. The kind of stare that says this isn't a performance anymore. "I'm not afraid of the truth," he said, his voice low, clear, and stripped of all stage polish. "But I won't be a part of this circus. I came here to speak, not to be dragged through a game dressed up as justice." His grip on the mic tightened once before he slowly set it down on the table, the metallic tap of it touching wood sounding louder than any shout from the crowd. "This isn't surrender," he continued, jaw clenched, eyes unwavering. "I'm walking away not because I lost, but because I still have something worth protecting." Then, without waiting for a response, without seeking applause or sympathy, he turned and walked. He didn't look back, not once. Each step echoed beneath the studio lights, crisp against the polished floor. The studio burst into chaos behind him, half the audience shouting his name, fists raised in furious support, while others screamed at him to face the footage, to prove them wrong. But he didn't flinch. The lights cast long shadows in front of him as he moved off stage, his back straight, movement steady, even as the roar behind him grew. Some called it brave, some called it cowardice. But in that moment, Trevor Noah wasn't delivering punchlines. He was leaving something behind. Jasmine didn't move, not at first. She remained seated, composed, her hands still resting on the table, her posture unshaken by the sudden vacuum left in Trevor's place. The camera swiveled, trying to capture both her stillness and his retreat, but she remained the fixed point in a room spinning on the edge of disbelief. She didn't chase the moment. She didn't revel in it. And when she finally stood, it wasn't with triumph, but with certainty. Her voice came not as a declaration, but as a verdict. "That," she said, each word cutting through the noise, "is what happens when the spotlight finds something real." She turned slightly toward the crowd, not needing to raise her voice to be heard. "When the truth steps forward, the act walks away." The words didn't thunder, they didn't scream, but they hit harder than anything she had said all night. There was no gloat, no fire, just ice. The audience didn't know how to respond at first. They were still watching Trevor's silhouette disappear into the black edges of the studio. He had dropped the mic without drama, but it echoed in every mind. An unspoken sentence that would soon be argued over in tweets, headlines, reaction videos, and political feeds. But Jasmine remained still in the center of the storm, a figure not of celebration, but of clarity. She had drawn the line, and he had stepped away from it. The lights dimmed slightly as the cameras refocused, recalibrating the moment that had just unfolded. Security stood quietly at the edges, unsure whether to expect applause or a riot. Jack Harper, ever the veteran of on-air tension, remained quiet. Even he knew not to speak yet. The moment didn't need narration, it needed space. Jasmine's eyes didn't follow Trevor. They stayed locked on the camera, as if speaking directly to the millions watching from behind screens. Those who had doubted, those who had defended, and those who still didn't know what to believe. Her voice, when she spoke again, was calm but final. He had the chance to speak. He had the floor. And when asked to face what was behind the curtain, he walked. She let that settle for a breath. You can call it pride. You can call it principle. But don't call it courage. Behind her, Trevor's empty chair still sat under the studio lights, untouched, unmoving, like a monument to everything he didn't say. The mic, cold and silent, reflected the stage lights like steel, and in front of it stood a woman who didn't shout, didn't chase, didn't waver. She didn't need to. The power had already shifted, and the room felt it. Phones were still recording, fingers were already typing, headlines were already forming. But in the heart of that moment, nothing moved. Nothing but the aftershock of a man who chose to leave rather than answer. A man who, for the first time, found himself outside the punchline, and a woman who refused to blink. The lights in the studio faded, but the story was far from over. Outside the walls of American Spotlight, the real storm had only just begun. Digital, viral, and impossible to control. Within minutes of Trevor's silent walk-off, social media ignited like dry brush catching flame. Screens across the country lit up not with analysis, but with reaction. Raw, immediate, tribal. The hashtag number sign, Trevor walks out, rocketed to the top of trending lists, spreading faster than press releases could be drafted. Someone clipped the final seconds of the broadcast, slowed the footage, layered it with cinematic music, strings rising as Trevor stepped away from the mic, his back to the camera, the studio chaos behind him. The caption read, "A man who didn't bend, a voice that chose silence over slander." The video passed 1 million views in under 20 minutes. Comments flooded in like a digital tsunami. This is what integrity looks like. They tried to corner him, and he walked with dignity. Real leaders don't need to yell. But the counter-narrative was just as fast, just as loud. Another clip, Jasmine standing firm at the table, documents spread like evidence in a courtroom, was already circling Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. A close-up photo of her beside the untouched microphone, eyes sharp, posture unshaken, appeared with a caption just as bold. "The lawyer who brought justice to late-night comedy." People shared it with fire emojis, with words like icon, fearless, truth teller. Political influencers on both sides of the aisle jumped in, some praising Trevor for his restraint, others hailing Jasmine as the face of modern accountability. The digital world didn't wait for the facts. It ran with the feeling, and the feeling was war. News outlets scrambled to keep up. Fox, CNN, MSNBC, all aired breaking panels within the hour. Words like ambush, meltdown, mic drop, and expose flashed across lower thirds. Every commentator had a theory. Every voice claimed insight. But beneath the surface noise, two images dominated the narrative. Trevor's empty chair and Jasmine's still hand resting on the folder. One spoke of retreat, the other of reckoning, but both had power, and the internet couldn't look away. While the online firestorm blazed, the reality behind the screens played out in far quieter spaces. Trevor sat alone in his New York apartment, the same one where he'd written thousands of punchlines, crafted monologues that made people think, laugh, protest. Now the city outside his window buzzed on without him, and his phone, muted, face down, vibrated on the table like a restless truth he didn't want to face yet. In front of him sat an old half-filled notebook, its pages wrinkled and worn from years of travel and late nights. He opened to a fresh page, picked up a pen, and with steady, unhurried strokes wrote, "Sometimes to protect your voice, you have to say nothing at all." He paused. Read the line twice, then closed the notebook and leaned back in his chair, eyes staring at the ceiling, not in defeat, but in reflection. Outside, a siren echoed distantly. Somewhere, another headline published. But in here, it was quiet. Across the country, Jasmine walked out of a packed press briefing, her blazer crisp, her expression unreadable beneath the flash bulbs of a dozen news cameras. Reporters shouted questions, most of which she ignored, her steps unbroken, her focus razor sharp. But as she reached the sidewalk, the chaos parted for something simpler. A little girl, no older than 8, tugged gently at her sleeve. "Are you really a lawyer?" she asked, wide-eyed, the kind of honest curiosity that cuts deeper than any broadcast. Jasmine stopped, looked down, and smiled. Not the smile she wore on stage, not the one trained for the spotlight, but something warmer, fuller. "Yes," she said softly. "I am." The girl beamed. Her mother snapped a picture, and Jasmine bent just low enough to meet her eyes, the weight of the moment not lost on either of them. To the crowd, she was a figure of controversy. To that girl, she was something else entirely, a mirror of what was possible. Jasmine stood back up, nodded once, and disappeared into the waiting car that pulled to the curb. No entourage, no victory lap, just the hum of the engine and a storm of attention following her through the streets of Washington. Back online, the debate only intensified. Viral edits appeared within the hour. Dueling TikToks of Jasmine's cutting questions synced to dramatic scores, and Trevor's walkout layered over Martin Luther King Jr. speeches. Conspiracy theorists began dissecting the USB clip frame by frame, questioning timestamps, lighting angles, even audio quality. Others rushed to verify the documents, digging into nonprofit tax filings, production budgets, and staff records. The facts hadn't changed, but how they were being weaponized had become its own battlefield. Influencers and podcast hosts dropped emergency episodes dissecting the confrontation. Some called it the death of comedy, others called it the rebirth of integrity. One YouTube title read, "Trevor Noah, Hero or Hypocrite," racking up 500,000 views by midnight. In the comments, civil discourse gave way to firestorms. Every opinion was a grenade, every reply a battlefield. Meanwhile, in private group chats, political consultants passed around the clips with glee or dread, depending on who they worked for. Campaign teams took notes. Messaging strategies shifted. The showdown had struck a nerve far deeper than the evening's airtime. Because this wasn't just about a comedian and a lawyer. This was about who got to shape the story and who walked away from it. As the night stretched on, the chaos didn't slow. It mutated. Hashtags evolved. Trevor walks out split into Trevor the Brave and Trevor the Coward. Jasmine truth clashed with trial by TV. Memes were minted in real time. One showed Trevor's empty chair with the words, "Integrity, 1, ratings, 0. Another showed Jasmine standing over a chessboard, every piece her opponent's. But inside the silence of those two private moments, Trevor alone with his notebook, Jasmine surrounded by the public but grounded by a child's question, was the only truth that wasn't up for debate. For one, silence was armor. For the other, words were a blade. And both had just learned the cost of carrying either in a world that never stops watching. Tomorrow would bring more headlines, more judgment, more fire. But tonight, the night the truth didn't end with a verdict, but with a walkout, it was clear. This was no longer just a story. It was a reckoning, and it had only just begun. By the time the first light of morning broke over Manhattan, the world wasn't waking up to coffee. It was waking up to chaos. The clip of Trevor Noah walking off the set of American Spotlight had detonated across social media like a controlled explosion, precise in its impact but uncontrollable in its reach. Every platform lit up at once. The war for truth had moved to the trenches of the internet, and within hours the narrative had been torn into pieces, each fragment claimed by a different army. Fox News was first to strike. They aired a segment within the hour, a split screen of Trevor's walkout in Jasmine Crockett's calm composure. The headline was clear, brutal, and loaded. When truth walks in, comedy walks out. Analysts took turns dissecting Trevor's silence, calling it the definitive moment. The left lost its grip on the narrative. They praised Jasmine not just for her evidence, but for her tone, measured, sharp, and unflinching. She didn't just bring documents, one commentator said. She brought a mirror, and Trevor couldn't look into it. MSNBC, in contrast, launched into immediate defense. He wasn't running, their primetime host insisted. He was stepping away from a trap designed to bait him into failure. They painted Jasmine as calculated, even opportunistic, suggesting that her performance was more political than principled. Their special segment was titled, "Dignity in Silence," when a comedian refuses the circus. The hosts argued that Trevor's decision to leave wasn't a collapse. It was a refusal to engage in a spectacle that blurred the lines between journalism and persecution. CNN played it down the middle. Their banner read, "Truth, Drama, and the Death of Nuance." They brought on comedians, legal scholars, political consultants, and even a body language expert to analyze Trevor's posture, Jasmine's tone, and every flicker of tension between them. They aired the full 7-minute exchange without interruption, an attempt at unfiltered context. But by then it was too late. People weren't watching full segments. They were watching moments, seconds, rewound and repurposed until they no longer resembled reality. On Twitter, the hashtags went to war. To Trevor walks, out began trending within 20 minutes of the broadcast ending. Supporters flooded the tag with words like honor, restraint, and real leadership. The most viral tweet came from a political cartoonist, a sketch of Trevor, back turned, walking away from a flaming stage labeled American Spotlight. The caption, "Sometimes walking away says more than staying ever could." But number Jasmine exposed truth was just as relentless. Clips of her calmly laying out the documents, her hand on the USB, her final line. When the truth stepped forward, the act walked away, spread like wildfire. One image in particular, showing Jasmine under the studio lights with the contract and emails spread like evidence in a courtroom, became an overnight symbol. Memes labeled her the lawyer America didn't know it needed. Instagram Reels mashed her footage with speeches from Malcolm X and Ruth Bader Ginsburg. On TikTok, creators reenacted her moment, syncing her voice to dramatic orchestral scores. One video reached 10 million views in less than 8 hours. Meanwhile, the fringe internet boiled over. Conspiracy theorists tore into the footage frame by frame, suggesting that Trevor's walkout had been pre-planned, even staged. Some claimed the USB had been planted. Others alleged that Jasmine had been coached by a political posse. None of it was verified. None of it mattered. In the age of viral proof, speculation travels faster than correction. Podcasters dropped emergency episodes overnight. Political influencers live stream commentary, reacting in real time to reactions themselves. On YouTube, a video titled "Trevor Noah just ended his career on live TV" hit 1 million views by breakfast. Another, called Jasmine Crockett, The Rise of a New Power, argued that the moment was bigger than either person. "This," the host said, "is about the shifting tide. The people want truth with teeth, and Jasmine delivered it." Think pieces flooded the web. On Medium, one author wrote a 3,000-word analysis titled "The Day Late Night Died." In it, they claimed Trevor's walkout marked the symbolic end of the era where comedians could hide behind satire without being held accountable. On Substack, a rival piece argued, "The weaponization of truth, how viral media creates false heroes." The author accused Jasmine of building a case out of innuendo and optics, not indisputable evidence. Both articles went viral. Neither changed anyone's mind. Celebrities chimed in with vague but provocative statements. A-list comedians tweeted things like, "Silence isn't always cowardice. Sometimes it's wisdom." A well-known civil rights attorney posted a split image. Jasmine beside Angela Davis, captioned, "The torch passes on." Musicians, actors, even athletes posted stories sharing their respect for standing firm. Whether they meant Trevor or Jasmine depended on which version of the story they had clicked on. But amid all the noise, one truth echoed louder than any side could control. No one was watching the full broadcast anymore. They were watching versions, fragments, cuts designed for confirmation, not clarity. The 7-minute confrontation had been sliced into 1,000 narratives, each one tailored to enrage, to inspire, to rally. In one version, Trevor was a martyr, pushed out of the arena for refusing to play dirty. In another, he was a fraud, cornered and exposed, his silence a confession. In one, Jasmine was a hero, fearless and composed, delivering justice in real time. In another, she was an opportunist, calculating and media savvy, manipulating optics for clout. The truth didn't matter. What mattered was which story you clicked on first. And through it all, the video kept climbing. 20 million views, then 30, then 40. But the comments underneath weren't about content. They were about allegiance, about sides. "This is the end of woke comedy." She brought the receipts. He stood his ground. She called his bluff. The same moment split into 1,000 meanings. All true, all false, all weaponized. One viral TikTok said it best, not with rage, not with irony, but with cold, honest clarity. "We don't watch for truth anymore. We watch to see who survives." In the chaos that followed, the confrontation became something it was never meant to be, a symbol. And in the hands of the internet, symbols don't stay still. They evolve. They harden. They break. Trevor's silence became a shield for some, a weapon for others. Jasmine's calm became a beacon for some, a trigger for others. And between them stood the world, not looking for truth, but for validation. Because in this war, truth wasn't lost. It was sliced, shared, and sold. And everyone claimed a piece. While the internet burned and split itself in two, far from the noise of trending hashtags and viral videos, something quieter, yet far more consequential, was taking shape in rooms without cameras. Washington, D.C. was already awake before dawn. Screens lit up not with alarm clocks, but with notifications. Phones buzzed on marble countertops, email chains forwarded in all caps. In offices tucked between monuments and lobbying firms, aides were skimming transcripts while pouring their second coffee. It didn't matter whether they supported Jasmine or Trevor. The response was universal. This is political gold. In a downtown strategy suite, 3 campaign operatives sat in silence, watching the viral clip for the 4th time. One leaned forward, pressing pause on the moment Jasmine placed the USB on the table. "That," she said, tapping the screen, "is the frame. That's the image we run with." A man across from her nodded, already drafting a subject line for a fundraising email. Another typed furiously into Slack, "Get graphics team on Jasmine asset pack. Stat." By 9 a.m., Jasmine's team had fielded over 30 media requests, including a primetime CNN slot and an exclusive with The Atlantic. But the calls that mattered most came not from media, but from inside the Beltway. Her name was now being passed around Capitol Hill like a secret too hot to keep. One senator texted a colleague, "This woman's not just sharp, she's fireproof." Another whispered to their chief of staff, "Find out if she's planning a run." In the offices of national PACs, the mood was electric. One group specializing in candidate recruitment had already drafted a pitch deck. Crockett 2026, from cross-examination to Congress. The cover slide featured a still of Jasmine under the studio lights. Folder open, eyes locked on Trevor like a prosecutor with no time for theatrics. Money was already shifting. Emails with subject lines like, "Did you see Jasmine?" and "The future just spoke," began hitting donor inboxes. Some groups didn't even wait for a reply. They just wired seed money. Yet Jasmine wasn't answering the calls. In a black SUV crawling down Constitution Avenue, she sat in the back seat, scrolling through headlines she hadn't asked for and watching videos of herself she hadn't posted. Her phone was at 7%, but she didn't plug it in. She was tired, not exhausted, not drained, wired. The kind of tired that keeps your eyes open even when your body pleads to shut down. Her staff talked in low tones. Media strategy, next appearances, social media filters. She barely registered it. Her mind was still stuck on that moment at the studio. Not the walkout, not the folder, but the silence just before she asked her final question. The moment she felt the room shift. She hadn't expected it to go that far. Not really, not like that. A text popped up from a number she hadn't seen in months. A member of the House Judiciary Committee. Just 2 words. "Let's talk." She locked the screen and slid the phone into her coat, then looked out the tinted window toward the Capitol. A storm was coming. She knew that. But for the first time, she wasn't watching it from a distance. She might be the storm. Elsewhere, miles north, deeper in Manhattan, a different kind of meeting was unfolding. A half-lit boardroom on the 22nd floor of a cable network headquarters. Large glass walls, polished table, cold coffee. Trevor's name was on the agenda, underlined in red. "We've got 2 options," a VP said, scrolling through analytics on his tablet. "Salvage the brand or spin off something new." Around the room, producers and execs sat in varying states of defensiveness, panic, and detachment. One leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "He walked off a stage, not a cliff. Let's not overreact." Another snapped back. "He walked off live," while holding the audience hostage with silence. "That's not principle, that's career suicide." The debate grew sharper. Do they frame Trevor as a man overwhelmed by manufactured drama? Or do they quietly step away from a brand that just went nuclear? A middle-aged PR strategist in the corner finally spoke, cutting through the noise. The issue isn't what he said or didn't say, it's that he didn't finish the performance. She clicked to a slide, viewer sentiment graphs. Audiences don't forgive unfinished stories. They want resolution, they want redemption or downfall, but never ambiguity. And Trevor Noah had just walked into the one space no network could sell, the gray area. In a separate room on a lower floor, two junior producers watched old clips of The Daily Show. One paused during a 2019 segment where Trevor roasted both sides of the political aisle. He used to own the room, she said softly. Now he barely owns the narrative. Her colleague replied without turning his head. Yeah, and now Jasmine does. The comment hung in the air like smoke from a blown fuse. In smaller circles, private dinners, closed-door briefings, the ripple effects were even more strategic. A well-known conservative think tank began assembling an opposition analysis dossier on Jasmine Crockett, not because she was a threat yet, but because she might become one. She's dangerous, a strategist told his boss. Not because she's radical, because she's compelling. She doesn't yell. She doesn't flinch. She just cuts. Meanwhile, Democratic leadership quietly debated whether to embrace her or distance themselves. Some feared her rise might split attention from midterm messaging. Others saw an opening. She doesn't need grooming, one advisor noted. She's already primetime ready. Hell, she created it. Outside of politics, big tech wasn't idle either. Streaming platforms floated soft offers, unscripted content, docuseries rights, even a limited biographical feature. A leaked deck titled Breaking the Laugh Track, The Jasmine Crockett Moment, began circulating between producers. Meanwhile, a rival network ran a poll. Would you watch Jasmine host her own show? The answer, 68% yes. Even Silicon Valley took note. A prominent VC posted, whoever signs Jasmine to a platform deal will own the next cultural inflection point. That's not politics. That's pattern recognition. But while others plotted, Jasmine wasn't planning anything. Not yet. She sat alone later that evening in a quiet corner of a Georgetown bar, her coat still on, her phone still buzzing silently in her pocket. Her assistant had taken the rest of the team to dinner nearby. She'd asked for space, for silence. She needed to feel her own thoughts, not the headlines, not the expectations, just the weight of what had happened. The bartender, a soft-spoken woman in her 50s, placed a whiskey neat in front of her. On the house, she said. You spoke for a lot of people. Jasmine nodded once, said thank you, but inside she wasn't sure if that was true. She hadn't spoken for anyone. She'd just stopped staying silent, and now everything had changed. The world hadn't stopped spinning, but for the two people at the center of the storm, it had slowed, unnaturally, painfully, and without mercy. Trevor Noah sat alone in his New York apartment, the city's cold neon glow bleeding through half-closed blinds. The room was dark except for the soft blue of his laptop screen and the yellow gold from a desk lamp that barely reached past the clutter of books and papers. On the desk, his old leather notebook lay open, its spine worn, the pages filled with half-finished jokes, story outlines, and headlines scribbled in red ink. It was once his map, his weapon. Tonight, it looked more like a relic. He picked up a pen, tapped the tip against the page, then froze. The sentence he had written earlier still stared back at him. Sometimes, to protect your voice, you have to say nothing at all. He hated how true it sounded now. It didn't feel like a quote anymore. It felt like a scar. His phone was on silent, flipped upside down. Dozens of unread messages pulsed beneath the screen, some from friends, some from producers, a few from old colleagues who hadn't texted him in years. He knew what they'd say. You did what you had to do. Or worse, why didn't you stay? He stood up suddenly, pacing across the apartment like a man trying to outrun something that lived inside him. This wasn't just about the broadcast. It was about everything it cracked open. He had built a career on words, precise, clever, cutting. But now silence had become the loudest thing he'd ever spoken, and he didn't know if it was bravery or the beginning of disappearing. Outside, sirens passed. Inside, the air was heavy with memory. He thought about South Africa, about stages where no one knew his name, about the early jokes that made people laugh and think at the same time. Back then, comedy felt like rebellion, a way to speak truth without carrying a flag. But now it felt like everything came with a flag. Every joke, every pause, every breath. He sat back down, pen in hand. Then slowly, carefully he wrote, "The moment you realize your audience isn't laughing with you anymore, they're choosing sides." He stared at it, then drew a line through it. Across the country, in a small townhouse nestled quietly in Northeast D.C., Jasmine Crockett stood barefoot in her kitchen. It was nearly midnight. Her team had gone home hours ago. The world outside was quiet, almost sacred in its stillness. The kettle on the stove hissed faintly. A cup of peppermint tea waited patiently beside a worn legal pad on the counter. She had written nothing. Her phone buzzed again. A new text from a major podcast producer. "We'll give you full editorial control. Just talk." She didn't respond. In the silence, she heard something she hadn't had time to register in days. Herself. Her breathing. The weight of her own thoughts finally uncoiling. She walked to the living room, sat cross-legged on the couch, the tea cradled in her hands. On the coffee table were the notes she'd used for the broadcast. Highlighted, annotated, marked with tabs and underlines. Every word had been chosen carefully, measured, controlled. She had delivered her message like a lawyer in court, but now that the performance was over, something else crept in. Doubt. Not about the facts, not even about Trevor, but about what it had cost. Was this what accountability looked like? Or had she become something she used to warn others about? She reached for the remote, flicked on the muted TV. A news panel dissected the showdown again. 4 commentators, none of whom had been in the room, all speculating on her motives, her tone, her clothing, her silence after his exit. She turned it off. In the quiet that followed, Jasmine thought about her law school days, about the protests she marched in, the cases she fought where no one had a camera. She remembered the first time a client cried in her office, not because they lost, but because she'd believed them when no one else would. That version of herself still lived somewhere beneath the sharp lines and power suits. But after American Spotlight, she wasn't sure if anyone else could see her anymore. To the world, she had become a symbol, but symbols don't get to be human. She took a deep breath, then whispered, not to anyone, just to the room. "I didn't ask for all this." Elsewhere, the ripples continued. In a college dorm room in Chicago, a political science major replayed Jasmine's segment for the 10th time. She paused at the USB moment, mouth slightly open, then pressed record on her phone and said to her followers, "Whatever side you're on, that was history." In a newsroom in Austin, an editor watched Trevor's silent walkout and told his staff, "This isn't about left or right. It's about a man who used to own the narrative, and what happens when the narrative turns on him." In a conference room in Silicon Valley, a tech startup CEO reviewed analytics showing that discussion of Jasmine's name had spiked 2,300% in 24 hours. "This isn't just a moment," he told his board. "This is a new cultural archetype." But neither Trevor nor Jasmine saw any of that. They were off the stage, out of the feed, alone with the parts no one retweets. Later that night, Trevor stepped out onto his apartment balcony, a hoodie pulled tight over his head. The city below glowed, timeless, uncaring. He lit a cigarette, something he hadn't done in years. Just one. Just this once. He watched the smoke curl upward, soft and slow. In that haze, he thought of the last thing he could remember, feeling completely proud of. A joke he wrote 5 years ago. Simple, honest, and real. Back then, he said, "The truth is like jazz. It doesn't always resolve." He smiled barely. Now it just trends. Jasmine, still on the couch, finally opened the legal pad. She didn't write facts. She didn't outline speeches. She wrote one question, center of the page. What happens when justice becomes performance? She stared at it, then put the pen down, and sat in silence. Not defeated, not triumphant, just still. As the lights dimmed across every studio, and the echo of viral clips faded into static, something deeper settled beneath the noise. A haunting question that neither a mic drop nor a walkout could answer. What happens when truth becomes a weapon? When facts are filtered through algorithms? When silence is seen as guilt and conviction is mistaken for performance? What's left? That was the raw, unspoken lesson carved out of the wreckage left behind. Trevor Noah didn't fall because he lied. He fell because he chose not to play a game that had already decided the rules. Jasmine Crockett didn't rise because she yelled. She rose because she wielded clarity like a scalpel in a world that rewards chaos. And in the crossfire between them stood something far more fragile than either of their reputations, the very idea that truth could survive the spotlight. Not untouched, not victorious, just intact. In a world addicted to reaction, the greatest act of rebellion might be restraint. Trevor's silence was not a confession, it was a barricade, a final defense against a system that no longer asks, is it true but does it trend? He walked not because he lost the debate, but because he refused to let his voice be hijacked by noise disguised as accountability. That doesn't make him a hero. It doesn't make him a coward. It makes him human, flawed, uncertain, and unwilling to let the stage rewrite his soul. And maybe that's the cost of having a voice today, knowing when to use it and knowing when to walk away before it becomes someone else's. Jasmine's power wasn't just in what she said, it was in her precision. She didn't scream. She didn't grandstand. She asked the questions no one wanted answered. But even clarity comes with consequences. In the public eye, a woman who stands still under fire is either a symbol or a threat. Rarely both. Jasmine didn't just challenge a man, she challenged the comfort of narratives we've all grown used to. That comedy is harmless. That satire isn't strategy. That intelligence wrapped in laughter can't be used to mislead. Her lesson was brutal. Not everything that makes us laugh is innocent, and not everything that speaks softly tells the truth. The injustice wasn't that two brilliant minds clashed. The injustice is what happened after. Neither of them got to define themselves. They were dissected, edited, and rebranded by the machinery of digital culture. Trevor was called weak for walking. Jasmine was called cruel for standing. And the truth, the raw, complicated, human truth, was lost in between. What we witnessed wasn't just a media moment. It was a microcosm of the larger war we're all living in, the fight to remain whole while the world tears you into digestible pieces. This story was never just about a show. It was about how we consume people. We demand vulnerability from public figures, then weaponize it the moment it doesn't match our politics. We say we want truth, but we reward drama. We say we want honesty, but we punish nuance. Trevor and Jasmine were never meant to win or lose. They were cast, without consent, as gladiators in an arena built on our attention. And no matter who walked out, the arena always wins. But here's what no one can spin. There was courage in both chairs. The courage to speak. The courage to refuse. The courage to risk being misunderstood in a time where every word is permanent and every silence is politicized. We can debate who had the facts. We can argue about who played it right. But what we can't ignore is that both of them, in their own way, refused to be puppets. The real lesson? In a world where everything is content, integrity is the only thing left that isn't for sale. Trevor kept his, Jasmine held hers, and we, the audience, are left with the burden of deciding whether we want truth or just entertainment dressed like it. The next time someone raises their voice, or chooses not to, remember this moment, not for the clash, not for the memes, but for what it revealed. The truth is not a weapon. It's not a performance. And it's not a side, it's a weight. Heavy, costly, real. And the ones brave enough to carry it don't always leave to applause. Sometimes they leave in silence. Sometimes they stay in fire. And sometimes, just sometimes, both are right. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.